Good morning and welcome to the Federal Communications Commission Roundtable on the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. My name is Trent Harkrader and I'll serve as your host in this virtual environment. Last December, Congress tasked the FCC with building from scratch a new subsidy program that would financially support the cost of broadband service to households and families struggling during this pandemic. Congress also directed $3.2 billion to make it happen and asked the FCC to open a public comment period right away to get stakeholders in to give their views. The response, as you might imagine, has been overwhelmingly positive. And this roundtable is a natural outgrowth of that comment period. We have two star-studded panels that we're very excited to bring to you. But before we begin though, and there's really no better way to underscore the importance of this project and this initiative, we will hear from the commission leaders, starting with Acting Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel. Acting Chairwoman, over to you.
Thanks, Trent. Appreciate you being master of ceremonies here today and all the work you're doing to get this program up and running. So good morning. Thank you for joining us, and a special thank you to our distinguished panelists. We've got a terrific group of experts assembled today, and I know you're going to have a thoughtful and constructive discussion. I also want to thank each of my fellow commissioners for joining us. It's a demonstration that this agency is united in its interest in carrying out our statutory duties effectively and efficiently. The Federal Communications Commission actually has a history of doing just that. In fact, earlier this week, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Telecommunications Act, which required this agency to hold dozens of proceedings in short order, including those that planted the seeds for our present universal service programs. This agency led the country through a digital television transition. We were responsible for the world's first of its kind broadcast incentive auction. The truth is, when we set our mind to it, we can accomplish big things. And that brings me to the here and now. We are working our way out of a pandemic that has upended life across this country. As a nation, we have been asked to move so much of our day-to-day activity online: work, education, healthcare, and more. It's apparent that broadband is no longer nice to have, it's need to have for everyone, everywhere. And to help make this happen, late last year, Congress directed this agency to establish a new emergency broadband benefit. It will expand access to high-speed connections and offer a new way to connect for those struggling in this pandemic and ongoing economic crisis. Now, specifically, Congress provided $3.2 billion for the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, which will provide discounts of up to $50 a month for internet service and up to $75 a month for the same service on tribal lands. It will also provide eligible consumers an opportunity to receive a discounted computer or tablet. So I believe in the urgency of now. We are stronger when we are all connected, and this program is a powerful way to help make it happen. So we need to make the hard choices that are required to get it up and running. This means outreach efforts not only by this agency, but also by all of our partners in this program and everyone represented here today. It also means policies that encourage robust participation by providers. It means wrestling with the privacy challenges under the law. And it means making sure that participants have clear and easy to follow rules of the road. This is worth the effort. That's because we know the cost of broadband is a hardship for many families, especially during the ongoing crisis and when so many are facing so much economic strain. According to the Pew Research Center, 1/3 of broadband users report they fear not being able to afford service during this pandemic. We need a program that responds to these concerns and is open to every eligible household. With so much of modern life now dependent on internet access, no one should have to choose between paying a broadband bill and paying rent or putting food on the table. But we know this kind of thing is happening. In the Washington Post this week, there was an article that began with the story of Ebony Winford. She's a psychologist at a clinic in East Knoxville, Tennessee. Her work in this underserved and predominantly Black community has mostly moved online. But for so many of her patients, reliable access to the internet is not a given. If they had access at all, it was typically on a smartphone, and their time with her was limited and precious. She said she started learning her patients' renewal schedules so she could set up an appointment without fear that she'd lose access to those she was supposed to help. She described how one woman had to cancel an appointment after exhausting her plan. She had used it up planning her brother's funeral after he passed away from COVID-19. We need to fix this. We need to address these digital deficiencies that are holding her patients and too many people in too many places back. The emergency broadband benefit can help. It's a program that Congress pulled together fast, and this agency now needs to make the hard choices required to provide relief fast. We welcome your input on how to do it. In fact, we need it. I know everyone here is up for it, full of ideas and eager to help, and I'm grateful for it. So now let's get to work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Acting Chairwoman. Next up is Commissioner Brendan Carr. Commissioner Carr.
Thank you so much to the Chairwoman for organizing this roundtable and these two panels. I think it's very safe to say that this program, this $3.2 billion broadband benefit program, is not just a top priority for any individual commissioner. I think it's the top priority for the agency right now. Getting this successfully across the finish line really requires an all hands on deck approach. And I think this event that the chair has put together is an example of that. And when you couple this with other directives that Congress has given us recently, including on the telehealth side, where we are to stand up a round 2 of our successful emergency COVID-19 telehealth program with another $250 million. I think it's suffice to say that basically every single body in this building is going to be working, if not on that initiative, then on this one that's in front of us. As we work towards standing this program up, I think as the chair pointed out, it is a pretty big burden to get done, but we are doing the work needed to get there. As we do so, I would lay out 2 priorities that I have that I think line up with the panels and their expertise that we're going to hear from today. The first is making sure that we prioritize remote learning and school kids. If you look at the structure of the statute that Congress passed, if you look at the public notice that we put out a few weeks ago at this point, we focused very clearly there on prioritizing the needs of school kids. If you look at the eligibility for the program, for instance, where Congress talked about free and reduced lunch programs being one way into this program, or the school breakfast program. If you look at the Pell Grant, I think throughout it, it's a very clear emphasis on making sure that we prioritize school kids. If you step back and look at the gap that we have left on remote learning, the $3.2 billion, when lined up with some cost estimates for really solving this issue, the $3.2 billion, if we do it successfully, if we prioritize school kids, we have a real chance at making significant progress in addressing this issue. So I look forward to hearing from the panelists about how we can prioritize that. Second for me is making sure that we have robust participation in this program. And that means, I think, continuing to do the work even today that's necessary on our back-end technical systems and databases and websites to make sure that when we stand this up, a broad range of providers are able to participate. Again, if you look at the statute, Congress was clear. They wanted us to bring in ETCs and non-ETCs alike in this program. And I think, obviously, Congress made the right call, although it's really none of my business. It's a call that Congress made. So our job now is to implement that. And I think that's making sure that all entities, regardless of the technology or the mode of delivery, have a fair shot at participating in this program from day one. And I think that's the way that we are going to get the best bang for the buck, and also make sure that we reach the most number of Americans, including those school kids that are going to be in need of this type of relief that Congress provided. So again, want to thank the chair for organizing this event, thank the panelists for bringing their expertise to bear. We have a lot of work to do, but if we do this successfully with sort of an all hands on deck effort, I think we can be very proud of what we accomplished with this program. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Commissioner Carr. Next up, we have Commissioner Starks. Commissioner Starks, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Trent. And thank you, of course, to all the panelists for joining us today. And much like Commissioner Carr said, I do thank the chair for organizing us here today. I think today is incredibly important. When I look down the list of today's participants, I see leaders who have spent much of the last year and beyond working tirelessly to make broadband an impactful part of our COVID-19 response, building on those years of experience fighting on how to close the digital divide. And so, of course, months of staying home has meant taking our daily activities, work, school, medical care, connecting with loved ones online, but not for everyone. Even before the pandemic and the economic devastation, of course, that it has caused, tens of millions of Americans did not have that adequate home broadband connection. And as I've said repeatedly, our longstanding digital divide has morphed into a monstrous COVID-19 divide. But let us speak even more plainly. In 2021, Black Americans and other people of color are still by a wide margin significantly less likely to have that home broadband connection that they need than their counterparts. This cannot stand. We can no longer defer the hard work on digital equity and believe that some future distant group at future distant time will solve this issue. This is our time. Now is our moment. And so when we focus on broadband, I again would focus us on the smoldering front that communities of color constitute in our battle against internet inequality. And so as we look to that shared future through this unprecedented crisis, unparalleled opportunity, leaving households disconnected will continue to hurt our ability to rebuild the economy, our workforce, diminish the ability of Americans and our healthcare system to keep all of us safe, and of course, dim the educational horizon of young learners everywhere who fall further and further behind. And so that does bring us squarely here today. Many of us have spoken together as I've started to think about the EBB over the last few weeks. And so I'm deeply pleased that we are gathered here today to have that robust and frothy discussion and that cross collaboration that is going to take all of us to make the emergency broadband benefit a success. And no doubt there are a lot of very complex issues, as mentioned by the chair. There are privacy issues, there are database issues, there are things with the verifier that are going to have to be nimble on. And so there are a constellation and a thicket of things that we're going to have to work to, but with complex problems come solutions. And so there are a lot of details to work out. The two that I think are headliners here is first, how are we going to get the word out? How are we going to get as many participants signed up as possible? As many of you know, I have long been exasperated by the poor job the FCC has done in recent years to get the word out about the Lifeline program. Only about 20% of Lifeline eligible households actually subscribe. And so for the EBB, we're going to need to do much better. And that means this broad collaborative outreach effort that must coordinate amongst the federal government will also need to include state and local governments, broadband providers, nonprofits, philanthropy, educators, direct service providers. We all need to be in this together. And it also means making that sign up process as straightforward and simple as possible. And so today's discussion, I look forward to, and it includes many of the leading issues and thinkers and doers in the world of digital inclusion. The second issue is maximizing, of course, the number of broadband providers who are going to participate. And that means we will only succeed in reaching every eligible community if a wide swath, a wide variety of providers, big and small, join in this effort. And so my conversations with broadband providers over the last year and periods give me confidence that we can meet that goal. But many of them responding to the pandemic with programs support their communities, and the EBB should expand, amplify, extend those efforts, and bring new providers to the table. So I look forward to the panel on this as well. And so let me close with, the late Congressman John Lewis made the urgency of this work clear when he said access to the internet is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And so before the pandemic, in the before times, I had the chance to sit down with the Selma mayor to discuss what a historic treasure of his city needs to develop and rebound. And we had a great dialogue. But I also had the chance to meet with Selma Public Housing Authority folks who had, even a year ago, a special project on getting low income folks that lived in free housing, a broadband and a tablet to their home. And so I'll never forget when I met that single mother of three who lived in the George Washington Carver homes, benefited from that program there in Selma. She was the living example and the power of broadband to transform lives, transform communities. And she told me with great pride how at home broadband access enabled her to complete her assignments for her online degree, all the while her children were able to finish their homework without making that trip to the local library or restaurant to find Wi-Fi. So let's bring that transformative experience to the millions more households that we know need it. The EBB is an important part of that effort, and no family should have to decide between keeping the lights on or getting the household connected, and certainly should not miss out on the benefits of broadband because of cost. So to those folks, we say help is on the way. I look forward to the hard work with the experts joining us today to make sure that this program is a success and the universal, high quality, affordable broadband a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Starks. And for our next presenter, we're going to go to Commissioner Nathan Symington. Commissioner Symington, it's all yours.
Apologies, I'm experiencing a bit of technical difficulty here, as is, I think, frequently the case during the pandemic. It's a great pleasure to be here today to discuss the emergency broadband benefit, which as we've all seen during the time of this pandemic, is sorely needed. We've all heard about the difficulties in connection that exist throughout the country, and the profile of each case is very different, which is what puts us in this unprecedented situation of having to find a glove that fits all hands. And because while the situations facing each person lacking connectivity are different, the need ultimately is the same. Without a connection, you are isolated from modern society in many ways. You can't access essential government services. You can't access essential healthcare. You can't access the stream of commerce, and of course, you can't access, in most cases, education. So the emergency broadband benefit is simply bridging a gap between what people are able to afford under present circumstances, or what infrastructure is available under present circumstances, and a need which has become increasingly seen as an essential part of life in the modern world. So as part of my office's engagement with this question, we've been going and talking to many companies across the country that are in the business of delivering emergency broadband benefits, or rather that I should say would like to be in the business of delivering them, because while they have been, as a practical matter, delivering services to those least capable of accessing them, nonetheless, they find themselves confronted with some difficulties in fitting into the state mechanism for doing so, and thus we face the potential situation and the uncomfortable possibility that a benefit that's intended to reach the people most in need may, precisely because of the compliance difficulties and the burden on doing so, fail to reach those most in need, and instead reach those who are already the most plugged in. I'm very excited to work with the rest of the Commission on delivering the emergency broadband benefit in such a way that it reaches those who are otherwise most likely to be disconnected, most likely to be isolated, and therefore those to whom Congress's intent of delivering the benefit is most applicable. And it's been a humbling experience, because it really reflects the diversity of our nation, seeing the vast variety of circumstances under which people don't have access. It may be because of rural isolation in the Southwest. It may be because of lack of availability of infrastructure in the far north. It may be because of social isolation or lack of commercial interest in build out in more urbanized areas. Or it may be because of social barriers in cases where the necessary technical infrastructure is in existence, but there are other obstacles. That said, Congress has acted with laudable swiftness in getting the EBB out there, and there's the potential to do a lot of good, and it's a pleasure to be in the position to assist with doing so.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Symington. Welcome aboard. Okay, folks, like I said before, we have two really great panels. Before we go to our first panel, though, even in a virtual world, we need a little bit of time to organize. So we're going to take a very, very brief break to let our first panel get situated, and I'll come right back in about a minute. Thanks so much. Welcome back, everybody, and welcome to part one. Our first panel today will focus on the importance of outreach and building awareness of the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. Specifically, how can we identify the households that need our help? How can we make them aware of this program? And how can we achieve an effective enrollment experience for everybody? Our moderators today for this first panel are two superstars from the Wireline Competition Bureau, Jody Griffin and Anik Banoun. Jody, Anik, over to you.
Thank you, Trent. And thank you all who are watching and to our panelists who have generously agreed to share their time with us today. I am Jody Griffin, Deputy Division Chief in the Telecommunications Access Policy Division of the Wireline Bureau. And I am joined by my co-moderator, Anik Benoon, an attorney advisor in the Bureau and a member of our emergency broadband benefit team. For our first panel, we will be discussing promoting awareness of the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program and facilitating consumer enrollment. Before we get started, I would like to make a plug for the FCC's new webpage, fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, where our colleagues in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau have created a tool for stakeholders to sign up if they are interested in helping to promote the new program. That webpage will also serve as a resource for consumers and stakeholders as more information and materials become available for the program. One more time, that's fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit. And now I will introduce our panelists. First, we have Matthew Gerst, who is Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at CTIA, where he leads CTIA's efforts before the FCC on a variety of policy matters. And Erica Myers, who is lead of Microsoft Airband US Rural and is responsible for managing Microsoft's Airband initiative in rural America. Next, we have Travis Noland, who is the manager of government relations for Cherokee Nation, where his portfolio includes advocating for and implementing programs that expand access to affordable, reliable broadband throughout reservation. Angela Seifer is Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, developing national strategies and solutions for broadband and device access and training. Next, we have Trinity Thorpe-Lubniewski, Senior Director of Program Administration at Comcast Internet Essentials, where she leads the administration of Comcast's Internet Essentials Adoption Program. And Olivia Wine is a staff attorney at the National Consumer Law Center, a nonprofit focused on promoting economic security for low-income consumers. And finally, we have Dr. Fallon Wilson, who is Vice President of Policy at the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council, where she leads the organization's work on several sectors, including broadband connectivity and digital inclusion. Finally, I do have one disclaimer to announce at the request of two of our panelists. Olivia Wine and Matt Gerst are on the board of directors of the Universal Service Administrative Company. They are not authorized to speak on behalf of USAC or the USAC board of directors. Olivia is here today participating in her role as staff attorney at the National Consumer Law Center, and Matt is participating in his role as Vice President Regulatory Affairs at CTIA. So now we can dive in. So the Commission recognizes that in order for the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program to serve as many eligible households as possible during the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to effectively promote and explain the program to low-income households. So this question is for Angela. The National Digital Inclusion Alliance has considerable consumer education and outreach experience. In your view, what forms of consumer education and outreach would be the most effective and that we should consider here?
Thanks, Jody. Thanks for having me. It's awesome that the FCC is doing this. I think we need to start with the fact that free internet sounds kind of scammy. Like, does it sound like it's going to be legit? It does not sound like it's going to be legit. So that's a reality we have to deal with, because we all think that this new benefit is amazing and we want to make sure that most people get the benefit from it that they can. So for us and for our affiliates, we know that comes from community-based solutions, so that the communities are the ones that know who needs the service, and they're also trusted. Because if you don't believe the message, free internet, yeah, sure, right, buddy, then you need somebody that you trust to give that message to you. And then we also want to make sure that the folks who are delivering that message also know solutions to the other barriers. Where can you get a free or low cost device? Who has tech support? Where can I get digital literacy training, right? So, or, you know what, I'm not so sure about these privacy issues. Somebody's going to steal all of my information, right? That's a digital literacy issue. So who can I go to for those answers? By having that be all in the same messenger, we're going to be able to get a lot more folks signed up.
Thank you. And when we talk about community institutions, is that like state and local government or workers in the NGO world, or is there perhaps a mix depending on which locality we're thinking of?
Yeah, it is a mix. When we started NDIA, What we found is that those who are doing the digital inclusion work tend to be community-based organizations, libraries, housing authorities, local governments. And then when the pandemic hit, schools now do digital inclusion work, and they didn't before. All kinds of organizations who had never gotten involved in digital inclusion work now realize that they have to, because they can't meet their mission. If their mission is education, they have to figure out digital inclusion. If their mission is food, they got to figure out digital inclusion education, whatever their mission is. So making sure that we are touching all of the folks who already have those touch points themselves, that we as intermediaries get to the intermediaries at the local level, that's the key.
I see. It sounds like part of it might be getting the resources and the tools that entities need who are newly deep in the broadband adoption space because of their role with low-income households in the pandemic. So Travis, from the tribal perspective, in your experience, what approaches might be most successful in reaching your tribal members? What would you recommend as the best way to reach residents on tribal lands? And what role could tribal governments or other entities play that the FCC should keep in mind?
Yeah, I want to first preface my comments with the fact that the 400 or 574 federally recognized tribes throughout the country are all so diverse. They all have different levels of broadband capacity, as well as operational capacity for educational opportunities such as this to educate their citizens on the broadband benefit. So I think that's an important component. So I would urge the FCC to facilitate a tribal leaders call to hear ideas from the 573 other federally recognized tribes throughout the nation. Because what may work here in the Cherokee Nation, which is 7,000 square miles in Northeast Oklahoma, with about 385,000 tribal citizens, may not be the same thing that would work in Western Alaska for tribes up there. So I think it's important for the FCC to fulfill its obligation of government to government consultation with tribal leaders to get feedback on how to situate or design materials that will reflect well within their respective communities. The other thing to think about is tribal nations are often the first place that their citizens turn for assistance. And so we are a community. And so as citizens approach tribes, it's going to be important that they're educated on the specific requirements of the program, as well as easily enrolling their citizens within the programs or certifying their eligibility. So I think those are important factors. When you look at tactics, one of the things that most of us have in common is that we all either use Indian Health Services or have our own tribal health systems. So it's going to be important that the messages are communicated to the leadership of IHS as well as our tribal health systems, so doctors can educate patients throughout their system on the opportunity to access broadband. And that goes without saying the fact that in some of these communities, making sure you have a broad access to eligible providers is going to be important because of the limitations throughout Indian country on broadband access. So I'll use an example. Last night, I met a neighbor for the first time, and they've lived there their kids' entire life, and their oldest is 21, and they're still using mobile hotspots for connectivity. We have satellite at our house. We're a quarter mile away. They didn't know satellite was available. So there's going to be some educational components to that. And I think tribes shouldn't carry the full burden given their capacities, but I think they should carry some support for the FCC and USAC in educating their citizens for digital access.
Thank you, Travis. And I'd like to pose kind of a similar question to Dr. Wilson. What guidance or advice would you offer for successfully reaching or enrolling marginalized low-income communities based on MMTC's experience?
Thank you for having me. First, before I can give guidance on how to successfully reach and enroll communities of color, We as community advocates, private companies, and government leaders need to agree on one essential thing. The EBB is a great step to ensuring connectivity for our most vulnerable community members, but we need a permanent solution moving forward. Congress must act now to provide appropriated, comparable EBB-like government subsidy to ensure that all people have access. And the reason why this is super important is because all of the amazing partners on this call are going to activate their networks. They're going to get them enrolled in the EBB. They're going to go through the national verifier process, and then the money will run out. And so how do we then transition people? How can we have informed consumers when we know that this is a limited emergency broadband moment? And so we have to agree to that, right? Because if not, you're going to get people's hopes up, and then you're going to dash them and say that, oh, the money is gone. So that's the first thing. And so if we can agree to that, then I can tell you the steps to really effectively enroll Black and Brown communities into this program. I think the first thing that the FCC should do on their brand new website, which I'm very excited about, is really teach people what is a speed. Is a speed bump? Is it the 1990 speed movie? And how does the number of members in my household affect how fast I can go, how quickly I can load, and how many times will I use this device? And if we have multiple, you have to be able to help community advocates like all of us on here to better explain to the consumer communities, I like to say personally, what they are getting and how they can get it so that they can have a choice of providers to use, right? But they have to be informed. And if we can agree to that, then I think there are four major communities that we really should begin outreach on that have access to large swaths of people who are often unconnected and also disconnected, right? And so the first community I think that the FCC should build relationships with are faith communities. I know a lot in government, we don't talk about faith communities, but you should. African American people are 70% more likely than any other racial or ethnic group in this country to say that their religious identity matters, and specifically their Christianity matters. Same thing at 59% for Latino people in this country. Working through people's imams and through their clerics and through their reverends and pastors to translate the importance of the EBB is a first step in the right direction. And specifically, if we're thinking about the African American community, the church has always been a place for political engagement. When we think about voter engagement, when we think about civil rights, it has always been a place where folks have done this. And if you look at Zoom and at Facebook, the Sunday mornings and Saturday evenings are really lit because people have figured out through their faith convictions to get adoption going, right? And so I think we should start there. And you could do it because there's so many congregational and connectional ministries across this country that you could start with those leaders there. The second thing I would say would be, we really, of course, schools, we all are school advocates here. We all have various thoughts about the E-rate and all the many challenges there, but I think we really should begin talking with school districts because those who are doing remote learning, many of them are using their transportation systems to deliver nutrition and food to their communities. Wouldn't it be amazing if we can talk with them about also doing enrollment and sign up as they do food drop-offs in those neighborhoods? It's like we got to maximize the capacity of what our school districts are doing because they're doing a heck of a job on much scarcity in an unknown space of a pandemic. And so we can lessen the burden of what they're already doing and build on what they're already, the networks and systems that they have. I think you can really be effective there. The next group of people where you have a large number of folks in immediate impact, you should look at our Hispanic serving institutions, our historically Black colleges and universities, and our tribal colleges. Why? Because they too need to be connected, number one, but they can be what the National Urban League has written in their Latimer plan, digital navigators. They can go into communities and once again, educate people on the EBB and also educate them on a permanent solution from Congress, right? On how to get connected and how to get enrolled. It allows them to be connected. And then the last group I would say, when you talk about marginalized communities and who we should be talking to immediately, we should be talking to grocery store, yes, chain operators, as well as those who are over gig economy businesses. Why would you say that, Dr. Wilson? Well, I'm glad that you asked, even though you didn't ask, but it was funny when I said it. The reason why we should be really reaching out to those communities, number one, they have done a tremendous job to ensure that our country was able to eat, to get the items delivered to us. For those of us who have had privilege to be online, to have connectivity, right? And being able to work with them, number one, as a site for enrollments, right? That's the first thing. And also to get their people enrolled into the program, and then how their networks of delivery could actually be a type of process of delivering information on the EBB. Once again, we have to figure out how to maximize things that are already happening so that people will want to adopt this, right? And give public outreach. And the last thing I would say, which is extremely important, right? I know that all of us do this amazing work for our communities and we love it, right? And we love the internet. I mean, everybody loves the internet, right? But we're going to have to employ offline strategies, meaning that we need to be able to use some of them funds to do PPE so that people can knock on doors, so that people can meet in their church or in their mosque parking lots to get connected. And I think if you do those things, you really can have immediate impact. But it goes back to the most essential thing, that this is a emergency period and we need a permanent solution.
Thank you for that wealth of information and ideas. That was really great. I'm curious, either for Dr. Wilson or for the other panelists, when we see a couple of these examples, maybe faith-based groups, grocery stores, or just in general for the ideas that you listed, I think in our experience in the Lifeline program, we have not seen that kind of outreach, or at least not on a broad scale. And I'm curious, do you have experience or examples where broadband initiatives or other outreach initiatives used those community institutions, and what lessons can we learn from those examples?
I would venture to say, I have two examples. And actually, in the rural Black Belt of South Carolina, working with African American churches, there's an organization called the Balm and Gilead. And so what they do there in the rural Black Southern county that they work in, they work through their churches, number one, to get people connected to telehealth during the pandemic. And so they use hotspots. They literally go to people's homes and teach them how to use it with mask on, right? And get them enrolled in some type of system so that they can get telehealth services delivered. Matter of fact, they are seen as one of the best practice by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, as a way to really deliver telehealth services. But they have to have PPE and hotspots, right, to go into homes to make those things work. Another example would be the work that Stacey Abrams have done. I'm sorry, I don't mean to take up the time of this. I mean, the reason why she was able to enroll so many people to vote in southern and rural parts of Georgia, because she took hotspots yet again and figured out the broadband, wireless and wired, because I believe in both of them. Let me just say this, because I know y'all are on here. And she used them to register folks to get to be enrolled. I mean, I'm not saying that was the immediate thing that happened for Georgia, but it is an example to say that you have to have both offline and online ways of engaging people, and it has been effective.
Thank you all for that. I know that I've been monopolizing the question, so I'm going to pass it to my co-moderator, Anik, to ask a few more.
Thank you, Jody, and hi, everyone. We realize that providers can play a critical role in consumer education and outreach, but we'd like to explore others we should be reaching out to as well. What other issues should the Commission be thinking about to help promote the program and ease the application process? Olivia, given your expertise, who are the stakeholders that should be involved in consumer outreach? And what have you observed as the most effective forms of consumer education?
I'm going to echo some of the earlier panelists because I agree with everything that's been said. Trusted communicators are critical. We need to empower these trusted communicators, so we need to give them the tools. So I think we need to think of outreach and education sort of maybe in two layers, right? How we sort of give the tools and educate those that will be on the front line, who will have that sort of person-to-person contact. They will be the ones getting the questions. So they really need to understand the program a little bit deeper and sort of how the pieces fit together, and they need to have those tools to easily say these are the providers and services in your neighborhood versus in the whole state. Um, I think that then the second layer is that very sort of, consumer facing material. Now, both of these need to meet people where they are. They need to be in the right language. It has to be jargon free. It has to be, you know, appropriate. And I think this could be where, the handoff happens between materials developed, at the federal level and materials developed at the community level, because the community advocates, these frontline folks, are going to be the ones taking these materials, and they're not, if they're good, they're not going to just hand them over because it's not going to really make sense. They're going to repackage them. This is where philanthropy could really be helpful. I mean, we need funding, again, in addition to like the PPP that Dr. Wilson had mentioned, but funding actually for that time to sort of massage the materials and to repackage them in a way that they know their community will understand. I think that's really important, if we want to be successful. And I think we need to be intentional about that and deliberate about that as we develop these materials. Um, we're all in. I mean, this is very exciting. This is much needed and long overdue. We're very excited to be at this roundtable. We're excited to see the excitement about this program and the array of folks that want to get engaged. I think that when we think about how important broadband is to the daily life of all of us, particularly in this pandemic, but pre-pandemic, post-pandemic recovery, um, these are the networks of people that I think we should be thinking about reaching. So, in addition to the digital inclusion experts and the faith communities and the education communities, they're community-based organizations that have been there already in the trenches, helping consumers with, other utility issues like water disconnections, energy disconnection notices, potentially evictions, right? Food assistance. So empowering those communities and those networks through their national associations, but those community action partnerships, nonprofits, agencies will be critical. Developing materials that they can then use and then send down through their very grassroots frontline organizations will be helpful. There are national organizations with state members that we should immediately be engaging. There's the National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates, very familiar with a lot of the issues wrapped around Lifeline. I think that this is a natural alliance here. The National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, the National Energy Assistance Directors Association, AARP. AARP has state chapters. So again, and they do consumer facing help. So these are natural organizations that we should be bringing on board as fast as possible. Elected officials that have constituent services can be very helpful because those constituents will probably be calling with questions. So materials that they can then hand out to their constituents. Social workers, legal services, United Ways 211. These are information channels. Legal services helps low-income consumers with an array of issues, right? So there are offshoots there, seniors, consumers with disabilities, housing insecure individuals. So, getting those folks and those channels materials that they can then push out, because they're very interested in broadband as well. Access to justice issues, right? So courts have moved their proceedings online, the famous cat video. Um, but low income households without access to broadband can lose their day in court if they, are not connected. So you've got people who need broadband connectivity that can help make the connection. Again, meeting people who have an immediate need with this emergency broadband benefit, you're going to capture. They are very interested right now because they need it. So this is an ideal moment to catch them. I think the food pantries, the food delivery network in this time of crisis, as Dr. Wilson had mentioned, there are these networks that have been set up. This is an excellent way to also sort of get the word out. Veterans assistance organizations, particularly those with a focus on telehealth, will be critical. I think public health clinics as well as their providers. The healthcare networks want their patients to have telehealth so that they're not knocking on the door or showing up in person, right? We need to mitigate the spread of COVID. Affordable housing providers again, and as well as associations working with those that are housing insecure, tenants' rights organizations, critical. We have the traditional, civil rights organizations who've been there from the get-go. They're in the community. Um, Again, enlisting their help. We have organizations that help people with disabilities, centers for independent living. The FCC also has that fantastic disability rights office with their network, but enlist them, help make sure that the materials are accessible, understandable, and usable. That would be fantastic. And then, organizations that deal with domestic violence survivors. That's going to be a critical, vulnerable population that could really use this benefit. And, perhaps using the legal services sort of channels to reach that population. So there are a lot. We all have networks. And I think that, making that plugging in for the website, which is fcc.gov/broadband benefit, no space between broadband and benefit. Register. Folks, if you have networks, if you want to be part of this, this is, going to be a centralized place to hear it firsthand and to get the materials firsthand and to also be part of this iterative conversation about, I think we need materials that better say this, or, this seems to be a common sticking point or a friction point in the application process. Can we have some training materials or materials dealing with that particular problem? So we want to build a feedback loop. It's not information just going one way. I would hope that there's a process for people on the ground, because that's where you notice the problems first. They will see it first to be able to send the information back up and then to get these modifications and additional helpful materials out the door. So I've spoken a lot, but very excited, as you can see.
Well, thank you, Olivia. Those were a lot of very helpful recommendations. Matt, I have a similar question for you, but more from the wireless industry perspective. The wireless industry has been very successful during this pandemic at connecting students to make so that students can participate and connect with school and other ways that they need to continue on with their lives. What as a whole has been the most effective means of consumer outreach for the wireless industry? And specifically for CTIA, who did CTIA work with in conducting its education and outreach?
Sure, and thank you so much, Anik, and to the acting chairwoman and everyone for participating in this roundtable. We represent CTIA, the wireless industry that has been there for consumers throughout COVID-19, handling major spikes in traffic, keeping consumers connected, helping us all navigate the new normal. But we know that there are too many people who are still struggling here. And during this pandemic, that's why Congress and the FCC created this emergency broadband benefit to try to lower the stress on consumers for at least their connectivity needs. So for many years, mobile wireless services have been the primary means for low-income consumers to connect to basic government services, job and educational opportunities, healthcare. As providers have delivered more and more services for less cost, the added benefit of mobility that is not being tied to your house has made mobile wireless a fundamental choice for low-income consumers. So quickly, let's look at the Lifeline program and what that can show us about how mobile wireless can really help the emergency broadband benefit program. So before Lifeline supported mobile wireless, we did struggle to get consumers signed up for Lifeline. But today, most of the 8 million Lifeline customers are wireless. And over the past year, as you noted, through COVID-19, we've seen that mobile wireless services offer the same kind of benefits for remote learning. Yes, the industry enhanced its offerings and they partnered with school districts and they set up new initiatives to connect schools and students. But it's really the value and the mobility enabling students to learn wherever they are, not necessarily in their house all the time, that has enabled providers and schools to connect those 2.4 million kids last year. So what does this tell us about the emergency broadband benefit? Wireless delivers the type of value and mobility and service that low-income consumers can easily adopt and access. And wireless providers are very good at getting consumers signed up for these programs. So of course, we absolutely support all the efforts that have been talked about up to this point. The Commission's effort to stand up that website yesterday and get people connected and start to create a list to get information. That's great. And it's going to be very helpful to making sure that more eligible consumers are aware of this benefit. But when you look at this record, you see major providers incented to get their customers signed up. And if we get these program rules right, you will see wireless providers competing aggressively with cable, wireline, new providers, all competing for low-income consumers. That is a very good thing. So generating awareness for this benefit through competing providers can become one of this program's hallmarks, so long as we do the following. First, we need to make it easy for consumers to verify their eligibility. For the existing 8 million Lifeline customers, they're already verified and eligible. Let's not make them jump through a lot of hoops to determine their eligibility for this program too. For people not in Lifeline today, the National Lifeline Eligibility Verifier's automated processes work pretty well. 71% of eligible Lifeline consumers are actually qualified through Medicaid, through which the verifier already has an automated process. And it probably will be very similar for this program too. The verifier's manual process, it's challenging for consumers. We need to, take steps to look at how to make that easier. One of the ways is opening up the interfaces in the verifier to make it easier for providers to actually help consumers through the process. Second, we need to make it easy for providers to enter the program, and we need to give them the certainty that their good faith efforts will be applauded, not punished. And third, we need to let consumers choose the services and devices that will meet their needs. That means broad definitions for eligible services, including bundled services, of which 86% of Lifeline consumers are subscribed to today. That means permitting services that have been enhanced since December, and a broader definition of what equipment could be supported, including smartphones and hotspots. And I personally think that consumers are going to choose wireless, but we've got to let the consumers choose, not tip the scales to certain providers or services. And if we can do those things, the success of this program will be clear from the millions of eligible low-income consumers who are receiving these benefits as soon as possible.
Thank you, Matt. That was also a very helpful answer. Thank you so much. Trinity, a question for you. Comcast states in its filing in this proceeding that it's now in its 10th year of its Internet Essentials program, and Comcast has expanded eligibility and enhanced its offerings to include seniors and veterans and people with disabilities over the program's lifetime. What lessons learned can Comcast offer based on its years of experience? And how has Comcast refined its outreach strategy over time, particularly as the company sought to expand the program's eligibility?
Thank you so much for that question, Anik. And first, I just want to thank you all for inviting me here to be a part of this panel. I am so grateful to be here with fellow advocates, movers and shakers, and others in the field. And I have been so grateful to work with many of you throughout the years.
Trinity, I can hear you, but you are a bit soft. Is it possible to get closer to your microphone?
Is that better?
That's a bit better. You weren't as loud as the other panelists, though, but.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Can the other panelists hear? Okay.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. And thank you so much. I am just so privileged to be here. I've had the wonderful privilege of being a part of Comcast Internet Essentials program for 6 of its 10-year existence. And I began, when I started with the program was only serving households with school-aged children, and it's been such a source of joy and pride for me to watch the program expand to reach new populations like those you mentioned, Anik, and to evolve to continue to meet the needs of households. We've learned so much along the way to connecting 8 million low-income people, and we have our partners to thank for helping us get there and get to where we are today. we've always had the goal of reaching as many households as possible with what we do and with the power of the internet with each one of our expansions. And we've grown to appreciate throughout this time span even more so that there is really no one size fits all approach. I think that's what all the panelists are saying today, that we have to meet each community where they are in their own language and with the right message and tailored training. We've developed some best practices along the way, and I'll share a couple of them with you now. First, we are most frequently asked about our materials for our program in English, Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, Cantonese, Somali, and Russian. And we've learned that program materials, our application, our call centers, they must all be able to reach diverse populations. And that's why we've made our materials available in 30 languages. Our online application is available in 7 languages, and our dedicated call centers are available in English, Spanish, and American Sign Language. And they can also support up to 240 languages. Second lesson that we've learned is that our customers are more likely to respond and complete an application process if it is simplified and streamlined as much as possible. And it's for that reason, and I hear it being echoed by others, that we've worked really hard to make sure that we do that. We've eliminated credit checks, and we've enabled 3 different expedited review paths for the application. Those paths really enable the customer to get through the application without a lot of burden. For example, when at least 40% of a student body in a school is eligible for the National School Lunch Program, or that school participates in the community eligibility provision, all the students in that school and their families are eligible for participation in our program as well. And that's exactly what we need to do with EBB. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we've learned that we really can't do this work alone. Dr. Wilson, you said this so well. We can only accomplish great things together. We have been able to be so successful in our program because of the relationships that we've built with tens of thousands of community-based organizations who have worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the program in their communities and who have built trust. Angela, you spoke to the trust issue. For Internet Essentials, CBOs, libraries, schools, municipalities, et cetera, have been key to our success and to successful outreach. And they've really served as that trusted voice within communities. These partners, for us, they really greatly assist with our efforts to promote digital literacy and get households information so that they can sign up.
Thank you, Trinity. That was a great answer. Erica, Microsoft's filing in this proceeding suggests that the EBB program be publicized and that call centers be established to answer questions about the program and begin the application process for those who are interested. Do you have a model for these initiatives that you can share to inform the Commission's efforts?
Sure. First, I'd like to say thank you so much for having this roundtable. I think it's extremely important. In 2017, Microsoft launched the Airband US initiative. That initial initiative was focused on rural America. In July of this year, we launched an urban initiative that is focused on urban America and solving the digital divide around 3 points, which is affordable access, affordable devices, and digital skilling. In rural America, our focus has been on access because there is obviously a lack of access, high numbers of unserved and underserved areas in rural America. Our model, the model that we're proposing, has 2 large pieces, and really affordability will address all of these issues in both urban and rural America. Our 2-part model first starts with the FCC. We believe that the FCC needs to do outreach, that we are proposing that outreach have 2 pieces: creativity and also leveraging community organizations. Many of the people who've already spoken have talked about leveraging these community organizations that have high touch with the very people that would benefit from this program. We believe that the FCC could create toolkits that these people who actually have interaction in a close range with people could leverage and get the word out about EBB. The second piece that we have is about call centers. We believe that USAC could stand up these call centers through the support of the FCC. What would happen at these call centers is interested persons in participating in the program could call the call center and have a coach actually help them apply for the program. This is really important because, as Commissioner Starks already pointed out, about 80% of the people who could participate in Lifeline are not participating in Lifeline. And we know that everyone that tries to apply for Lifeline is not successful through the verifier. These call centers could help fill that gap. In addition, there's lots of people who are not even aware of Lifeline. So the awareness campaign focused with a high touch call center process could really help provide a lot of new applicants and participants in the program. We think there's a lot of success here. The commission has done similar outreach with the DTV transition. So we know that the commission, when given the right resources and given the right impetus, has the ability to get the word out to whoever needs it. But we also know that USAC has experience in setting up call centers. And so we believe that these two things together would provide a way to get out the outreach as well as have people initiate the application process.
Thank you. We really appreciate how thorough all these answers have been. Before I turn back the questioning to Jody, one more question that's directed at all of the panelists, especially those who haven't shared recently. Are there any other processes we should look to put in place to ease enrollment and maximize participation in the program? Trinity.
Thanks so much. I forgot where the button is to raise your hand on Zoom. So appreciate that. So yeah, I'd like to chime in here that when it comes to easing enrollment and maximizing participation in EBB, I think the FCC is taking the right steps. And we really applaud the FCC for establishing the website that they've developed to help raise awareness about the EBB program. This site is critical, as you've heard time and again from the other panelists, to getting information out about the program and to maximizing consumer choice by allowing EBB participants to search for and be able to choose eventually from a number of EBB approved providers in their area. A couple of other thoughts here is that a single start date for the program launch will really help to ensure that those receiving the benefit have the full range of choices that meet their connectivity needs. Since each participant is only allowed to use their benefit with one provider, I think this is especially important that they are able to access a full list of all participating providers so they can make that choice with full transparency and all the information they need. Moreover, going back to what I said just a few minutes ago, a streamlined application process is essential. This is especially true for non-ETCs that are stepping up to connect new households and keep others connected. This would help promote broad participation from ISPs, which will further accelerate adoption among low-income households. And then the final point is that we've learned that there are multiple touch points that are needed and clear and simple communications to drive adoption. The more barriers we put in place, the more people are going to fall out of the process. And so we encourage the FCC to coordinate with USAC and other federal agencies to really help with that outreach. Those other agencies have databases that are relevant for determining eligibility in EBP, like the Department of Health and Human Services, and those can play essential roles in outreach efforts, especially to, in this example, recipients of Medicaid.
I would add, really for enrollment purposes, right? I think you have to have informed consumers, right, or informed community members who will be helping consumers get enrolled. I think we need a type of, on the amazing new website that you're crafting, number one, increase the UX experience of it so that people find it engaging and easy to use. But I would also say there should be some type of public transparent way that we can see when funds are being depleted. I think we need to have a clear understanding of that so that providers can do what they need to do to make transitions, so that community partners can do what they need to do to make transitions, so that our trusted and beloved community members can transition and choose their best course forward. That has to be a public and it has to be as transparent as possible. And I know that government has amazing technologists and maybe it's some type of public-private partnership to really build out that website so that we can have that type of automated tool. Because if not, it will, once again, you get people activated, you get people online, and then you say the money is gone, and then they're left. And that doesn't promote an informed consumer, or when we decide to do this in a more permanent way, when we go back to our communities members. So some type of transparent public way for all of us to know when money is being depleted.
Olivia, I saw you shaking your head in agreement while Dr. Wilson was speaking. Would you like to add anything?
Yes, absolutely +1 to, that sort of very current information about spend out rate. It needs to be fairly frequent, like weekly, if not, smaller periods of time. But my pitch is also whatever tools are developed, keep in mind the ability to engage with the smartphone, right? So can we create an easy way to get to the tools through the smartphone or even apply through the smartphone? Because that is a way right now where a lot of folks are navigating the internet. Also, in to add on to how can we build for success, we have to keep in mind, meeting people where they are. In language radio sort of segments that folks can just sort of plug and play would be really helpful to get the word out about this program. Social media toolkits would be helpful. You know, PSAs, and then the old school sort of, bus, train, ads, things that you can place like posters in the community or in the agency. Also really helpful to get the word out.
Thank you, Olivia. And I know we're just about at time, but we have a couple more panelists who have indicated interest in that question. So I'd like to give them a chance for a quick response, and then we'll have to wrap it up for our next panel. So Travis, would you like to go next, and then Matt?
Yeah, I'll keep my comments brief, but one thing I was going to add from a tribal perspective, tribes are already enrolling citizens in some of the programs that qualify them for the broadband benefit. And so some way to streamline that process for those counselors who are looking at their citizens a holistic approach, they may be coming in for food distribution. If they qualify for that program, there should be some way for tribes to certify their eligibility into the broadband benefit program. So I think it goes back to what Dr. Wilson and Trinity said, meeting people where they are. These people are already coming in to apply for services. We already have a database of people who qualify for those services. So I think it's important to leverage those things, as well as, partnering with the HHS and Medicaid to educate them when they're enrolling new consumers to automatically enroll them into the benefit. So, and I would like to circle back to what Matt said earlier related to wireless. Wireless is important and it has done a lot of good throughout a lot of tribal nations, but it's important to remember a broad scope of service providers, because in a lot of rural areas, you can drive 2 miles and not have a cellular ability. So I think that's important as well.
Thank you. And oh, I'm sorry, I was going to pass it to Matt next. I see that Erica raised her hand too, and I'm a sucker for a good conversation. So I would like Erica to end us after Matt speaks.
Well, thanks. And since I won't get another chance, just want to say thank you again for giving us this opportunity to participate. But, I just want to make a point about, new providers who are going to be participating in the program and what sort of is the reasonable time period between adoption of the rules and the benefits flowing. And I think USAC, who's likely going to be administrating most of this, is going to be able to come up with a process to onboard those new providers. In fact, just yesterday, USAC announced a series of webinars that are going to start next week for interested providers. You should go to USAC's website. You have to kind of find it. It's under the About tab. I was on there this morning. It's not actually on their homepage, but if you go to the website, you'll be able to find it, and you can sign up for their webinars to start getting familiar with the Lifeline Eligibility Verifier and the accountability database. But to accommodate, these efforts, there needs to be some reasonable period of time between the adoption of rules and starting the program to enable the providers to get the verifier and NLAD into their systems and to give consumers time to elect to participate. But let's not make consumers wait too long to start receiving the benefits. We should also recognize that many providers are going to have their own eligibility verification programs or use third parties. The FCC is going to need some time to vet and validate those. And so that's a lot to do, right? But Congress wanted these benefits out there quickly. So it shouldn't be more than 30 days before we start to see consumers receiving the benefits, right? And all of this suggests that mobile wireless can be the most efficient and cost-effective way to harness the benefit, and the Commission's rules should reflect that. But of course, there's going to be a lot of questions. There's going to be a lot of effort and initiative around this. But let's try to keep things going here so we can get these benefits out to the people who really need it as soon as possible.
Well, I'm actually glad that Matt said that, because it kind of goes to what I want to talk about, which is an even playing field. We want to make sure that the people who want to participate in the program as service providers, as well as people who want to be beneficiaries, are on an equal playing field, and that there's not a class of people that are able to take advantage of this opportunity at one level, and then another group of people that have to wait 3 months to be able to take advantage of the opportunity. So we think there should be enough time for there to be outreach, for the trainings to be set up. We think some of the trainings for providers should be focused on new providers. And then there should also be training that differentiates for existing Lifeline providers the difference between the EBB program and the Lifeline program, because as it's contemplated in the public notice, they're not going to be exactly the same. But again, we want to have an even playing field. We want to make sure that providers can all enter at the same time, and that beneficiaries can enter at the same time, and that there's not 2 or 3 classes of participants. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. So first, I would like to thank all of the panelists, not just for the time you've given us today, but for the years that you all have spent thinking and working on these subjects to build the expertise that we are now leaning on and launching this program. And for those of you at home who heard Matt and Erica's remarks just now and thought, these are really interesting questions, we need to talk about them more, this is actually leading perfectly into our next panel, which is about provider participation and consumer choice. So please stay tuned, and we will be hearing much more about that from another star-studded panel. So thank you all very much. And I believe we will have a very short break while we switch panelists, and we will be back soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jody, Anik, panelists. That was phenomenal. And I'm really glad that you guys got to go over time. This is not broadcast television. This is a rare opportunity for all these panelists to gather together and have this great conversation. So thank you so much for that. We will be going to another break. This break will be a little bit longer, 5 minutes, to let the next panel get organized and give anybody at home the opportunity to stretch their legs, have a cup of coffee, whatever keeps them going. We've got another great panel and another great set of moderators, and we can't wait to come back. So we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Thank you so much, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. This is part 2 of the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program Roundtable at the Federal Communications Commission. We had a fantastic first panel, and I know that the guests for the second panel know they have the work cut out for them. This second panel will address provider participation in the new program and consumer choice. And if we're doing our job, we'll explore provider access to the program, the current broadband marketplace, and ways that we can maximize consumer choice. Our moderators are, again, another set of WCB superstars, Jessica Campbell and Christian Huffley. Jessica, Christian, over to you.
Thank you, Trent. Hello, and welcome to our panel on provider participation and consumer choice. As Trent said, my name is Jessica Campbell, and I'm an attorney advisor in the Wireline Competition Bureau. I, along with my colleague, Christian Hoffley, also an attorney in the Bureau, will be co-moderating this panel. Joining us are our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Virginia Lam Abrams. Virginia is the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs and Strategic Advancement for Starry Inc., a wideband fiber wireless technology company focused on building competitive, affordable, high-quality broadband across the United States. Virginia is responsible for leading Starry Connect, the company's digital equity program focused on providing ultra low-cost, low-barrier broadband access to public and affordable housing communities. Next, we have Brenda Victoria Castillo. Brenda is the President and CEO of the National Hispanic Media Coalition. Brenda is a Latinx Native woman who is an activist, feminist, national strategic leader, and a renowned speaker in the areas of diversity and inclusion, hate speech, media civil rights, and social justice. Welcome, Brenda. Next is Anissa Green, the Director of Federal Regulatory for AT&T. She is based in AT&T's DC office and is currently working on universal service and video regulatory issues with a focus on Lifeline, rural healthcare, media ownership, and retransmission consent matters. Christian, will you introduce our remaining panelists and start our Q&A?
Thank you, Jessica. And I am pleased to introduce Steve Morris, who is Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for NCTA, the Internet and Television Association. Steve represents NCTA on a variety of regulatory issues related to broadband and voice services. Also pleased to be joined by Francella Uccello, who is the Executive Director of NetCentury Cities, a nonprofit comprised of over 200 member municipalities across the US that works to expand affordable and reliable high-speed broadband connectivity. She is also an attorney and digital rights advocate and has worked on a variety of technology and telecommunication issues with a specific focus on policies that affect underrepresented populations. And finally, Mike Romano, who is the Senior Vice President for NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association, overseeing the organization's public policy and government affairs and business development initiatives, as well as education and community-focused missions for the Foundation of Rural Service. So jumping right into the Q&A, our first question focuses on the fact that Congress has provided upwards of $3 billion to address broadband adoption and affordability issues in the emergency broadband benefit. This framework hopes to leverage participating providers in both the Commission's existing universal service programs and the Lifeline program. But it's important to make sure that new providers who are unfamiliar with these systems have time to gain access and can offer the benefit to their subscribers. So Mike, from your perspective, how can the Commission best encourage small, local, and rural carriers to participate in this program?
Christian, thank you for letting me participate today. I appreciate the Commission's opportunity to talk a little bit about how small rural providers can help make this program a success. Just as a way of background for perspective, we have about 850 members, and in terms of how small and how rural, they average about fewer than 30 employees in their operations, and the customer densities in the areas they serve are less than 7 per square mile. So very small, very rural. So obviously mindful of how compliance burdens unfold and apply, and also mindful of the need for accountability and integrity and how these sorts of programs are run. I think there's 4 steps that we can sort of take or identify to make sure that we encourage participation by smaller and rural providers. The first really is to mirror or leverage existing systems and processes to the greatest extent possible. So I think the Commission is proposed using the verifier, the NLAD, the claim system, the audit procedures. They're in place for Lifeline now, and I think that's a good start. But we recognize that, practically speaking, you can't necessarily just graft those onto this program. There are new providers who are going to come into the systems, and there are also new provisions in the rules, for example, that are going to apply in terms of what kinds of eligibility for customers is available. And so it's a heavy lift. You can't just snap your fingers and add new data into these systems. Also, just some Lifeline rules and processes simply won't translate. So port over what you can, but also recognize that this is a new program, has new needs, new challenges, intended to address a different population, a broader population, and try to adjust accordingly. So you're going to need things like alternative verification or self-certification, for example, to help bring more consumers into this even as you're using the verifier. I think we and many commenters also suggest helping folks by creating model compliance plans or looking at the 2012 Lifeline guidance, for example, that was used to help smaller providers comply with some of the rules in that system. The second thing I think we would say is make customer enrollment processes more simpler and more well-defined. So our experience with Lifeline is instructive in this regard. For example, a lot of manual processing needs to be done because of things that aren't in the verifier right now. It can't be run through an automated basis. In the past, our members have a lot of retail offices. Customers would be able to come in and get help with those, but they can't do that obviously during a pandemic, and this emergency broadband benefit's intended to address that. So how can we make it such that providers can help bring consumers into this system, even if they can't do sort of in-person help? Is there a way to do more virtual assistance? Again, alternative systems, use of third-party programs, some of the digital bridge things that we've been doing, for example, with respect to school lunches and figuring out which students might need help, that I know we can probably talk about later, would be helpful to start. The third thing that I think the Commission needs to do potentially to think about to help smaller providers participate is to plan ahead for what comes next. There's a real concern about this being a temporary program for providers and consumers alike. And what happens as the funding begins to hit its sort of expiration date, if you will. We can talk more about the specifics of that later, I suppose, but the point is we need to make sure that providers and consumers alike have good visibility into what's going to happen as the program funds begin to be expended. And then finally, I think the last panel hit it really well, and you covered it really well, so I'm not going to go into great detail there. Marketing and messaging, helping to make sure that providers of all kinds, new providers into these sorts of mechanisms, can participate and know what to do and know how to market this effectively. So thinking about common marketing themes, common messaging, common branding to the extent possible, helping with the Commission and USAC helping with that. The public notice, I think, did a great job of teeing that up yesterday as a starting point, but continuing on those things, bringing state broadband offices into this, state public utility commissions, local stakeholders, however we can get as many people as possible to get the message out there, and hopefully have it be a consistent message so consumers can look at it and make an apples to apples comparison as they're looking at different providers. So those are, I think, some of the initial steps to bring smaller and rural operators in.
Thank you, Mike. Steve, from the NCTA perspective, what can the Commission do to encourage robust cable competition and ensure your providers are participating in the program?
Yeah, thank you, Christian, for the question, and thank you for folks at the FCC for including NCTA in this event. For us, we were very excited about the legislation that created this program. I think Congress recognized and was very intentional about wanting to really make this successful, in part by bringing in a broader group of providers than we've seen in the Lifeline program, bringing in companies, many of our members who have not been Lifeline participants in the past because they've created their own programs. You heard, in the earlier panel from Comcast about their Internet Essentials program and how successful that's been. Many of our other companies have done similar programs over the years and done that really in lieu of participating in Lifeline. But I think Congress recognized, and we're excited about the chance to really participate in this program. And I think all of our members have been following this proceeding and are, very eager to see what the Commission does in terms of rules for the program. In terms of steps the Commission could take to, turn that interest that our companies have into, strong participation, I think I'll hit three of the important points that we've focused on, some of which you've heard from others in the first panel and as well as from Mike. first, as we said, we want the program to include new providers, but we think it's really important that all providers really be participating on a level playing field. Everybody having the same application window, having a single start date when we all can go out there and start competing for customers for this program. I think that's one of the exciting things, is really that you're going to have competition for customers that in the past may have been marginalized. And I think what you ideally want to avoid is having some providers start first. If it's just the existing Lifeline providers, which right now is over 90% wireless, you're really depriving customers of the full range of choices. And I think, particularly with so much emphasis on remote learning, people working at home, you really want to give people the option to buy whatever service is going to best fit their needs. Second, there's been a lot of focus so far, and I think something we're very focused on is USAC and the various databases that will be used to make this program operational. For companies that have not been part of Lifeline before, there's a definite learning curve. It's going to take time, and those databases have to be updated. There are updates that have to be made for this program because it's different than Lifeline, as Mike was just saying. And then there's updates and training and personnel that will be needed to onboard companies that haven't participated before. Matt on the earlier panel talked about webinars being available, which is a great start, but it's just the start. We really need much more hands-on training opportunities, hands-on use of databases, so that we can fairly quickly, after the commission adopts rules, have USAC in a position where any provider that is approved by the commission can use those databases and start signing up customers on day one on the same footing as other providers. And then third, one of the, I think probably the biggest challenge with this program is really the temporary nature of it. You have a pot of money, you're going to distribute it, and then we're done. And we don't know whether that's, is it 3 months, 6 months, 12 months more? It's a lot's going to depend on demand. There's a lot of uncertainty around that. And that is challenging for customers. It's challenging for the commission, but it's definitely a challenge for providers. One of the challenges, which I think we'll talk about later in the panel, is how we communicate with customers around the length of the benefit and what happens when the benefit ends. But just at a higher level, just in thinking about regulatory obligations and administrative burdens, the commission really should be sensitive to keeping those sort of proportional with the length of the program. You don't want to overwhelm people with obligations for a 6-month program because they won't participate. And I think, as Mike said, leveraging what people are doing already to make it easy for them. And so for, in part, that means using Lifeline tools that are already there. That's certainly helpful for Lifeline providers. For other providers that may have existing verification processes, that means, the commission quickly approving those so that companies can use what they know and not have to learn whole new tools or create new tools, because that's just not going to work in this time frame. So I'll stop there and we can move on.
Thanks, Steve. And I think the point you made at the end about what companies are doing now and how consumers are interacting with those providers transitions nicely into Brenda, a question I'd like to ask you from your perspective and your organization's perspective. what types of non-traditional providers, but also what are community outreach efforts and what can the commission learn from what is working on the ground now to ensure those providers are participating in the emergency broadband benefit. Brenda, I believe you're still on mute.
There we go. Sorry about that. NHMC supports the EBB benefit, and we hope that it lays the groundwork for future long-term broadband subsidy to address the digital divide that will last long beyond COVID-19 pandemic. However, we're concerned with the rollout of this program. Will it be equitable and inclusive to fulfill its mission of connecting as many people as possible? Our concerns fall into three major buckets: eligibility, competition, and outreach. One of the biggest concerns with the current trajectory of the Lifeline program is the new EBB program is to decrease in competition in the broadband marketplace. It is essential that the EBB be rolled out in a way that encourages competition and robust provider participation. Increased choice and competition lowers the costs and increases the quality of offerings in the broadband marketplace, and this should be our goal for the EBB. Currently, the broadband market is dominated by just a few big internet service providers who thus have the market power to set high prices and implement terms and conditions that benefit the bottom line, but not consumers, like caps on data usage and expensive contract termination fees. So we must look into that. Such a lack of competition currently exists in broadband marketplace that 70% of US households have either one or two ISP choices. And that's the fact. This largely means that the average person we are aiming to help likely has one choice of a provider for EBB. If we can encourage ISPs to participate, more of them, we can increase consumer choice and make sure that those hit the hardest by the pandemic are getting the kind of broadband service that is best for their family. And this even holds true for communities that are considered unprofitable and have even less choice in providers due to digital redlining that affect communities of color. If the commission rolls out this program and very few providers participate, we are essentially wasting our efforts. To get the most out of the program, to help the most vulnerable people get connected, we have to ensure that a myriad of providers participate and are interested in the success of the EBB program. As we mentioned in our comments to the commission, there are a number of industry examples to use as models in conjunction with the Lifeline program. At the moment, Lifeline rules require that the consumer provide a Social Security number to verify their identity. This is an unnecessarily exclusionary and actually does not match what the industry is currently trying to do. There are a number of ways to verify identity of consumers in the enrollment process without requiring them, to be citizens. Existing private sector low-cost programs, and it was mentioned earlier by Trinity in the other panel, Comcast Internet Essentials programs allow consumers to provide a variety of other documentation to verify their identity, like driver's license, passports, and other government-issued IDs. If the eligibility of the EBB includes those who are already enrolled in low-cost programs like the Internet Essentials, why would we then turn around and exclude them based on unnecessary process? Immigrant and mixed status families, those who use ITINs, DACA recipients, and other under a differently documented people should not be categorically excluded from this benefit. And it is so essential that it is so essential in their everyday lives. Now, to mention the fact that 5 million frontline workers in the US are undocumented and thus ineligible for all relief provided by the United States government so far. It's also important to note that the process of the enrollment itself is important. A recent study by the US Government Accountability Office found that the Lifeline's manual process to determine eligibility has a high fail rate. 68% of applications are abandoned. I mean, Commissioner Stark said himself that 80% of those who are eligible do not belong to the Lifeline program. Another industry example that the commission can use as a model is T-Mobile's Project 10 Million program. Right now, if a student whose school is not participating in this program, that student who does not have internet service can walk into a T-Mobile retail store with a parent and guardian and apply for free Wi-Fi enabled hotspots. They have to be enrolled in a national school lunch program, which, by the way, does not require a social security number. They do not do a credit check, and the student just has to provide the school district and name and address. So the key here is to keep things simple.
Thank you, Brenda. And I'm also interested in hearing from Priscilla on the same point about reaching out to underserved communities that traditionally haven't seen access from broadband providers robust enough to support the needs currently, and kind of what you've seen from net-century cities and models that work and the types of providers delivering those models.
Well, good morning, everybody, and I'm really appreciative of the FCC even hosting this panel. It actually speaks to the seriousness of this moment when we need to really find ways to connect some of the most disenfranchised, disconnected people, and actually find ways to rethink and reimagine a program that could actually reach low-income families that essentially do not have regular interface with federal government entities. One of the first things that I want to start with when we're talking about providers is that we need to take a really expansive view of who is included in this program. It is not enough for us to just assume that some of the small and mid-sized providers, the municipal networks, the mesh networks, these models that people have had to come up with CARES Act funding, all of these people don't necessarily know about FCC proceedings or how to actually be involved in universal service programs. So just in the same way that the FCC is going to do outreach to make sure that residents find out about their eligibility, I think it behooves all of us to really think about who are the partnerships that we need to forge at the outset, like right now, in terms of sending out invitations to state broadband officers, public utilities commissions, counties, local governments, people who've essentially had to figure out COVID solutions on their own for the last year. Another thing that I want to point out is that when we're thinking about what actually helps boost participation for providers, I think it's really important that everyone has the same centralized information. When we were thinking about, what was going to go into our comments, we actually reached out to almost 30 local governments, and very few of them even knew about this proceeding. So the thing is, if they didn't know about their proceeding, and a lot of the broadband officers are on their staffs, then that means that the people that they serve aren't going to find out about this program. So we need to be really aggressive about not just hoping that they attend a webinar, but actually send them a notice that you're invited. Because if we are serious about embracing them, then we need to be intentional about that outreach. Another thing that I want to bring up is that Steve mentioned something about a single start date when we're thinking about that for providers. I think that, we need to make sure that I totally agree with something that even came up on the panel before when we're thinking about to make sure that everyone has the same information at the same time and can operate with the same options. One of the things that we need to think about is what is the outreach that's going to happen before that start date? Because again, the people who are already involved with the program are inherently at an advantage because they'll already know about it. They're preparing their systems, they're thinking about what's administratively required. All of those things are already in the process. And some of these really small networks that really don't know about it, and I point people to the docket, look at comments from Longmont, Colorado, San Francisco, California, Washington State, where people are actually saying, we need to embrace non-traditional models to make sure that people in unserved and underserved areas are going to have a provider. Because the reality is, as much as we are using the machinations of the Lifeline program, when we look across the United States nationwide, there are lots of pockets where people do not have a Lifeline provider. So the FCC is going to have to answer the question, if we don't have a Lifeline provider, and you don't have an incumbent provider, then who are the small people that we need to reach out to make sure that they have an option through EBB? So I think that that's a natural question that needs to be answered. Another thing that Mike, I actually want to bring up something that was really important that Brenda brought up about eligibility for participants. we need to be really thoughtful about if this is really about serving every single low income, underconnected resident that needs broadband support during COVID, thinking about eliminating the barriers for them to be able to participate in this program. And something that came up when we're talking about encouraging competition, I want to make sure that we're thinking about this is not about them having subpar service and like hopefully they get, I don't know, DSL or something really slow. The point is we want to make sure that they have competitive like connectivity, because something that came up in City of Austin's comments, some students were actually marked absent in the 2020 school year because their broadband was so bad and they got disconnected so often that they weren't even counted as attending a class on a remote learning platform. So it's really important for us to think about, okay, we don't just want them to get connected, we want them to have robust service. So we should be thinking about what are things that we can do to give people incentives to not just give them the baseline, but if we're actually to have, networks that are like municipal networks, hybrid networks, where they are actually already providing gig speed service at some of the most affordable prices in the country, then maybe this is a time for us to start thinking about not just them getting baseline connectivity, but them being able to actually participate and contribute to a digital society. Another thing that I wanted to circle back with is something that was so important that Mike brought up about thinking about what's next. I think the reality is people will be reluctant to participate in a program that they're not sure what's next. On the participant side, where you might be come from a household that's traditionally somewhat suspicious of government services, maybe you don't trust the providers, you've been looped into a COVID program and then it ends and they hooked you on a program that you can't afford, so now you have a new bill that you're trying to deal with. I think the reality is that we need to have some certainty from the FCC, not to just talk about what's next for EBB, but how this is one part of a chapter of us marching towards universal broadband access. Because if we can enlist this type of partnerships, whether it's state partnerships, local, county, community advocate partnerships, we're going to need all of those hands in order to reach some of the most disenfranchised households. So when we're thinking about this, yes, we're building the EBB program, but we also need to be thinking about how does the EBB program fit into the larger architecture of universal access.
Thank you, Francella. And that's I believe, excellent transition into Jessica's next question.
Yes, thank you. And I was furiously writing notes because, Francella, I want to circle back on some of the things you just said, but I want to get to some of our other panelists first. So we've heard about increasing consumer choice among providers, but ensuring consumer choice and robust broadband service is important to address rising broadband needs during the pandemic. So Anissa and Virginia, what flexibility should consumers have in applying the benefit to a provider's broadband plans? Anissa, why don't you start us off and then we'll go to Virginia.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for this opportunity. AT&T agrees that consumer choice is important, especially as the FCC considers rules around implementing the EBB program. Consumers should be afforded simplicity and ease in applying for and receiving the EBB benefit. One way to keep it simple and easy is to ensure that consumers can apply the EBB benefit to bundled plans and grandfathered plans that a provider has elected to make part of their EBB benefit service offerings. Another way is to permit broadband services that existed on 12/1/20 that were since enhanced for the benefit of the consumer, including that they're paying less for their service today. Consumers should be able to receive the benefit on those services as well. For current Lifeline customers, they should be able to use their Lifeline status to get the EBB benefit without having to be re-verified, and use their EBB eligibility to get broadband eligible service with any participating provider while retaining their Lifeline benefit with their current Lifeline provider. And as many people have already said, that the transparency is extremely important. It informs carriers and consumers so that they can make good choices. And the FCC needs to keep constant information flowing on the status of the fund so that those decisions can be made.
Okay. Thank you, Anissa. Virginia?
Thanks, Jessica and Christian, for having us. I think our perspective, which is shared by everyone on this panel, is that the benefit needs to reach the consumers who need it most. Families who haven't had broadband access or those that are struggling to afford it. As Chairman Rosenworcel pointed out earlier this morning, the EBB was created so families aren't forced into choosing food over broadband or vice versa. So naturally, our position is that we think eligible consumers should have the ability to apply this benefit to the broadband services they want from the widest range of broadband providers possible. And that means not limiting them to certain speed tiers or programs that might not meet their household needs, and streamlining certification of eligible providers. We think that in order for the EBB to be successful, that eligible consumers should have that choice in the plans they can adopt, the service providers they can choose from, and that's really going to set everyone up for success. And I echo Anissa's comments about transparency and communication. I mean, that is really critical and key to driving the success of this program, but then also offering that range of choice for customers.
Thank you, Virginia. And Francella, I'm going to put you on the spot again, as I think you mentioned in your last set of comments about the need for competitive connections. So I'd like to unpack that a little bit more. How can the program help bring robust broadband options to underserved households? And is there a role for the connected device element of the program to help meet these households' needs?
Well, I think that one thing, when we think traditionally about low income programs, I think that we always think about it as them having just baseline connectivity. However, one thing when you leave Washington, D.C. and you go out and visit some of these community networks that essentially, for example, Longmont, that's been serving their community for over 100 years with electric service and then added broadband, Chattanooga, who had been serving electric service, built a fiber optic community network. When you think about those places, they're not thinking about just getting people minimum connectivity to 25.3. They want people to be able to have robust connectivity so that they can attend the same classes, the same online training, the same as everybody else in their neighborhood. And so when we're thinking about this program in particular, several of the comments actually pointed out examples where they were saying, look, we know that this is about everybody having access to minimum service at 25.3, but at 25.3, some of our students can't even complete the remote learning platforms that they're actually forced to comply with. And if this is something that's supposed to be a COVID response measure, we need to really be thinking about, is 25.3 serving that purpose? And so even if we are to set aside arguments about whether or not we should revisit that broadband speed, we really need to think about, is it something that's actually useful in this moment? And then when we're thinking about equipment, something that was really important in the city of Austin's comments, it also came up in Washington, really thinking about what devices are included. So even if it isn't a cell phone by the actual narrow construction of the legislation, what are we thinking about computing devices, routers, modems, all of those other things that add to service? So I think that it is really important for us to take an expansive view of what is related to providing competitive service, but at its core, during COVID, when we are forced to actually learn, work, go to get medical attention, and also contribute to an ongoing dialogue about our democracy, it's important that everyone has real-time access to the same information at the same time.
Thank you so much, Francella. Back to you, Christian.
Thank you, Jessica. And I think I want to throw it back to Virginia to speak a little bit about how the EBB can build off of existing programs that carriers are actually providing to low-income individuals, but also bridging the gap for individuals that have been traditionally unserved. So Virginia, can you speak a little bit about what Starry has done in this space?
Sure. Thanks, Christian. So back in 2018, we launched our Starry Connect program to provide ultra low cost broadband access to families living in public and affordable housing. We designed our program specifically at the time to address two deficiencies that we saw in the low cost broadband marketplace, namely speed plans that didn't meet the federal definition of broadband and a series of complex individual eligibility requirements that created huge barriers for families to adopt these low cost plans. So first, we designed a plan that provides for 30 megabit symmetrical service as a floor. And then second, we got rid of any individual eligibility requirement by partnering directly with the owners of public and affordable housing communities to provide blanket eligibility across an entire community. So eligibility is tied to the apartment, not the person. So no matter who lives in apartment 3B, if 3B is a part of our Connect program, our low-cost offering will always be made available to that resident. Taking the blanket eligibility approach enables two key things from our perspective: faster adoption and less friction at sign up, and a restoration of a little bit of dignity for folks who are in need. If anyone watching this panel has ever been in a position to have to seek public assistance, it's not a great feeling. And when you burden a person that's in need with paperwork that says, please affirm in as many ways as possible that you are poor, it is a soul-crushing process. Our experience shows that you can successfully work with partners like public and affordable housing owners to provide blanket eligibility to targeted communities, such as those receiving household assistance. And the way we implement it means that of the nearly 30,000 households that today participate in Starry Connect, I dare say most of those families don't even know that they participate in a specialized low-cost broadband program. They just have an additional option at sign up. It's that easy, and the EBB should be similarly structured to provide that same level of ease of participation. Our public and affordable housing communities understand how critically important broadband access is to their residents, and the pandemic has even brought that more to the forefront and to the focus of how they manage their communities. So it's our hope that they'll play a significant role in the implementation and rollout of the EBB program and getting this benefit out to those communities.
Thanks, Virginia. Francella, I'm gonna circle back to you, you made some very compelling points about localities, municipalities, and what they've currently done to bridge the gap to providers. I want to throw it to Steve to talk about how the EBB can build upon existing initiatives that some of the cable and competitor providers have, and then throw it back to you, Francella, to see if you have any points you want to expand upon.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. And that's really, you've hit on one of the key questions with this program. I think for all providers, certainly for our members, we have existing programs, and one of the things we want to do as much as possible is for people who are in those programs, EBB gives them a bigger benefit. It will, significantly reduce, if not eliminate, the price they're paying for those programs today. And that, as others have said, that frees up money to spend on other things and gives them still, great broadband service. But we also want to try to, I think the phrase Commissioner Starks used was, amplify what companies are already doing. And that's, I think it's one of the challenges of the program, right? We've got programs already. We do outreach at the local level, and now it's, what else can we do to bring people in? What's going to make this attractive for consumers? One of the things, certainly, as Virginia was talking about with housing, trying to bring in big groups. Our companies have been trying to do that with schools. We recently rolled out in partnership with Education Superhighway, the K-12 Bridge to Broadband program, and it's the same sort of philosophy, right? We work with the school helps us identify the customers who need assistance, and it's like a bulk billing arrangement. And I don't know if something exactly like that can work here, but certainly the relationships we have with those schools, the experience they've had over the last year trying to identify the people who don't have broadband connections. We want to build on that and find the people who still need help. I think one of the other things that will be interesting to see, and that could be a game changer here, is that the size of the discount is so much bigger than what you see with Lifeline. Lifeline, it's $9.25. I think what we've seen over the years is it's become primarily a wireless subsidy program, and that's great because wireless does great things and is it's really a lifeline for people. But as we've heard from a number of panelists today, we also want to get people more robust broadband that they can use for school and use for working at home and telehealth and all that. the bigger discount opens up possibilities in terms of getting people more robust service at really good price or even free. And that, I think, is going to, hopefully we can convince people that that's a great way to try broadband, right? For if it's free or if it's $5 or $10 to get a service that your kids can really do remote learning from, we need to, hopefully that's going to be attractive. And then we just have to manage, as we've talked about, the end of the program so that everyone understands the time frame and what comes next. But I think there's some real opportunities that we may see once we get this rolling.
Thank you, Steve. Francella, do you have any additional points to build upon what Steve just talked about or what any of the panelists talked about? And then Brenda, I want to also incorporate you into this discussion as well.
Oh, thanks, Chris. And I always want to make sure that where I think municipalities and providers sometimes see things differently. This question about single payer is actually something where there are local governments who support that. I turn people to specifically the mayor of Oakland, California, who actually talked about successful partnerships where they partnered with schools and also housing to be able to identify people in need during the COVID pandemic. And also the mayor in Madison, Wisconsin, who also filed comments on the docket. This idea of being able to partner is something that local governments have had to do in the absence of federal support. And so I think it's something that we need to continue, specifically the state of Washington, which partnered with school district, housing authority, the city of Seattle, and the state of Washington to submit their comments to say, look, this is interdisciplinary. This is not something that's just local or regional. This affects our entire state. So we have to work together. But one thing about eligibility that I do want to highlight, something that came up earlier about asking questions about who is eligible, and this adds to the certainty for providers. I think it's really important, number one, for us to be expansive about the lists of who are we using, not only with the national verifier, but if we're going to be using school lunch programs, we also need to think about public housing rosters. We also think local governments have had to create their own low income rosters during COVID to capture people who do not usually take advantage of government services. So we need to be able to partner with them to catch people that we're not getting in the margins. And then also something really important that came up in the Navajo Nation comments and also in Washington when they were talking about multi-generational households. That is something where I think, quite frankly, for millions of people of color across the nation, whether it be just from the closeness of their families or for financial reasons, it's very normal to have a multi-generational household where people might be taking care of an elder, or maybe you live with your parents and it's not a big deal, but that doesn't mean that you're not separately a head of household. So instead of saying that we're saying only this address is eligible, we should be asking about whether that person is a head of household and who needs help at that address.
Thank you, Francella. And Brenda, I would like to hear your thoughts on this general point of untraditional models that are helping serve people that are underrepresented, and specifically people that have been traditionally disenfranchised or members of the disability community.
Well, like I said, we have to keep things simple to enroll the vulnerable community. And I think everybody has alluded to it. In order to reach digital equity, it really has to be a partnership with government, with the industry, and advocacy organizations in order to reach every single person, because digital rights is a human right. And until everyone is connected, we're not doing our job. And I just want to bring up, though, that communities of color, there is an existing mistrust of government. So it's really important to roll out the program with trusted organizations. And my recommendation is what you're doing here today, but the FCC really has to work with anchor institutions that are local and national and that are trusted by Latinx, Black, Indigenous communities, because that's the only way that this program is going to be a success. And you have many of the organizations here today.
Thank you, Brenda. I also believe that we're joined by Myron Lizer, who's the Vice President of Navajo Nation, and who's graciously stepped in on extraordinarily short notice for President Nez, who was tied up in another panel. Myron, thank you for your time. And I want to ask a question about any specific considerations that the FCC should make in the emergency broadband program for Navajo Nation, and if you could speak to any broader tribal land considerations we should make to encourage providers to reach out to your communities.
Yeah, no, thank you to the panel here. I appreciate that. Discuss an emergency broadband benefit program. Yeah, and you're right. I was on another call, but I thought this important enough, especially in the absence of our president, Jonathan Nez. Our Navajo Nation Telecommunication Regulatory Commission Director, Chris Vicente, had alerted me to this here. And we think it's a great program. We want to be a part of helping you, I guess, deliver this enhanced service to our Navajo Nation and to Indian country. We understand that this is a great incentive for the 4 ETCs that are located here on the Navajo Nation and their customers. We believe almost all of our Navajo Nation consumers here, customers, are eligible for this $75 a month discount. And so what a boon. And I think you're right, the comment there by Francella is, the people of color distrusting government. I think it's the proverbial people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care kind of deal. And that is enhanced, that is brought and delivered. The vital messaging is brought to those communities of color and the vulnerable population by simply great messaging, and then roundtables much like this one, and then true tribal consultation. And those are the things that I guess our tribal nations really look at. And I think it's buoyed. The problem is buoyed by the fact too that people just don't really take advantage of tribal programs. They think it's something that only governments can do. In the event that the government doesn't, I guess, really have a platform or a true mechanism in which to roll out these great programs, much like the EBB here, then I think it's going to be a miss. The community is going to miss out, and the region, and most definitely the tribal government and its citizens or the customers will miss out on it. So we want to be, the Navajo Nation wants to be a part of this and help you all, I guess, help us, $3.2 billion in emergency broadband benefit in this program. We certainly want to participate. And I think we echo to all of those problems, our issues, constraints or bottlenecks here at the grassroots level. And how can we help you? We want to be a part of that messaging. I think we bring some vital ideas. And you're right too. This COVID-19 pandemic has just really magnified all of the problems, all the inequities that we've faced over the decades. And how can we I guess, arouse the support? How can we join all of you all trying to roll out necessary programs and beneficial enhancements that would help our citizens and elevate their quality of life. So we want to be a part of that, and I appreciate all of you all on this call, bringing this discussion and allowing us, and as the Vice President of the Navajo Nation, able to be a part of this. How can we join you all in that? I guess I want to echo everything that's been said, and we look forward to joining you in, how do we enhance this provider participation that is needed, and this consumer choice. It's really about that choice. Who won't pass up on an option, right? We don't have to have things kind of railroaded down and only one option. If there's many options out there, I believe it's the right of the people to know and to be privy to that and then make their own decisions. And so, yeah, we want to be a part of that. And anything that you all can do as far as information, as far as more roundtable discussions, yes, we want to be a part of that. So I hope I answered maybe something that you wanted to hear, and probably offered a little bit more. But as a tribal leader, our messaging, I feel all along, has to have been one that where we exaggerate the message just to affect change and to bring change and to bring, I guess, recognition and activism from the grassroots level. Leaders, we have to really be out there and almost be redundant all the time, but that's right around our realm here, being redundant.
Thank you, Myron, and really appreciate your perspective. Jessica, as we work to wrap up the panel, I want to make sure you have the opportunity to ask an additional question of our panelists.
Sure, thank you. And as Christian says, we're down the home stretch on this panel, and it'd be remiss if we didn't bring up actually winding down the EBB program. So, given the temporary nature of the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, FCC staff recognize that how we wind it down could be just as important as we kick it off. So for the providers on this panel, can you talk about how the fact that the Emergency Broadband Connectivity Fund may run out while the public health emergency is ongoing affects your decision to participate in the program, and what information would be helpful to have when it comes time to prepare for the end of the benefit? Mike, we haven't heard from you in a bit, so maybe we'll start with you.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Yeah, it is certainly a concern going in, because I think, as people mentioned previously, that could have an effect on participation. So it's a real concern for smaller providers in particular, and for their customers, about what happens when the funding runs out, how much notice will be given, what kind of communications will be expected. I think what we and others have suggested in the proceeding is the Commission and USAC providing greater visibility into a funding horizon, essentially. So every few weeks, for example, letting us know how many weeks or months of funding are left, to give a time horizon. I think the Commission might also consider, is there a way to standardize messaging to customers so everybody's delivering the same message, so there is minimized confusion, at least, as to why the program is running out. Note up front that the program is temporary in nature, and provide information about how consumers can continue to receive service at whatever level they select, or discontinue service without penalty. Customer communication, standardized customer communication, is going to be critical. And as others have said, keeping providers in the know and giving all the same information to them at the same time is going to be critical to make sure there's not customer confusion about why one provider is saying something one way and another provider is saying something another. The last thing I'll just say on this point is, this program, as others said, really, this could be the foundation for something much larger. Ultimately, this program could be the way of making sure that low-income consumers of facing different circumstances where they cannot afford to adopt broadband, have more of a meaningful opportunity to do so than the current Lifeline program permits. And so this should be an impetus too. Not only should we be standing up a program that thinks about how to stand it up as quickly as possible, but also how do we stand this up in a way that it could be sustainable? What are the things we need to do? Going back to, I think, something Francella said about this being a broader, something that fits into a broader picture of what universal service should be. So if there are ways to think about how the funding can be sustained, how the program rules can be set up in a way that this is not just a short-term infusion to address an emergency of the pandemic, which is essential, but also something that's a longer-term platform that can be replicated and sustained after the pandemic, certainly would encourage the Commission to think about those broader questions too, even as, of course, it's rightly focused on how do I get this stood up as quickly as possible and give providers and consumers visibility into some of the challenges.
Thank you, Mike. Excellent points. Virginia, what is your perspective as a fixed wireless provider?
I mean, I want to echo a lot of the same comments that Mike just said. In our business, we strive for transparency with our customers, because trust is how we build our strong and enduring customer relationships. And the EBB should really be modeled in the same way. As everyone on this panel has said, the Commission should be clear in how and when it will communicate to providers the level of funding remaining, so that we can all set the right expectations with our customers and ensure continuity of service for those participating households. And that's really the critical piece. As Mike said at the start of the panel, we need to be able to plan for what's next. And regular updates on funding levels and bi-weekly feels reasonable to me, allows providers and the FCC hopefully to accurately anticipate the expected program end date. I know some in their comments have suggested 120-day heads up or 90-day heads up, but I'm not sure that that's practical. And I think our preference would be more regular and frequent updates to allow us to plan. But it doesn't just begin and end with providers. And as Dr. Wilson rightly pointed out in the earlier panel, engaging the broadest range of stakeholders in communication, from faith-based institutions to community-based organizations and nonprofits to housing owners to schools and other anchor institutions, that's critical to this process. And if all our oars are rowing in the same direction, then collectively we'll be able to maximize the benefits of the EBB and set the right expectations for our communities and really build that trust to Mike's point, really create a foundation for a broader strategy in terms of how we really fill in the digital gaps that exist in our urban communities and our rural communities. And I think the EBB is really going to be instructive and informative about our policies on a forward-looking basis and how we can really reshape them to benefit the most Americans.
Thank you so much, Virginia. Anissa, I know in your comments, you noted that the fund could run out in just a few months. So how does that affect your decision to participate, or your company's decision to participate in the program? And what would a company like AT&T need to prepare for the end of the benefit?
And thank you. And I'm going to keep it short because I know we're running out of time. And like many other broadband providers, we're very interested in participating in this program. And so we think to buffer against some of the sticker shock at the end of this program, there needs to be actually weekly updates in some form, fashion, with including a running total of the number of subscribers in the program, cumulative disbursements, and an estimate of when the funds will be depleted. And in terms of an advance notice, we're thinking, at least a 90-day, hey guys, the fund is about to be done, and maybe you want to start thinking about how to plan for that end. We think that is reasonable. And so consumers and carriers are informed so that, again, we buffer against that sticker shock. No one likes it. And I think it'll be extremely helpful. AT&T would actually encourage the FCC, and it helps keep this program easy and simple and attractive, both to providers and consumers.
Thank you, Anissa. And Steve, I think you touched on some of these points, at the beginning of the panel, but is there anything else you think you would need in order to communicate the length of the program to consumers?
I think for the most part, all providers are in the same boat here in terms of needing as much information as possible about the status of the funding. I think one idea, and it's not our idea, so I don't want to take credit for it, but I know some commenters suggested maybe having the benefit be for a defined period, or setting a cap on the total benefit that a household receives. And that is worth giving some thought to. If everyone knew going in that, this is a 6-month benefit, that potentially eliminates some of the friction at sign up and at the end. There are probably other complications that you'd need to think through, but it's at least an idea that I think could possibly be helpful. So maybe, everyone should probably do some more thinking about that. But otherwise, it's really about transparency. And as I think Virginia said, trying to find ways. We want the people who sign up for EBB to stay on a broadband connection when the program ends, whatever that end process looks like. Ideally, we want those people staying connected. So we want to, I think that's a goal we all share at the commission, at public interest groups, and the providers. So let's figure out how to do that.
Thank you, Steve. Francella or Brenda, do you have a reaction to the suggestion to cap participation in the program to ensure a more tidier management of the program's end?
I like the cap idea. Anissa bringing up weekly updates and a 90-day notice are good ideas. The funding for the EBB will run out long before the need for the program will end. So first and foremost, NHMC urges the commission to consider long-term support for this long-standing emergency situation. Secondly, it's going to be incredibly important to make sure that the providers, when communicating with and enrolling consumers, that they're very clear and what will happen when the money does run out. This means ensuring that communication is transparent and culturally relevant. Without this transparency, eligible consumers who will be in need of the EBB support will probably, or pending just the uncertainty, they might not just sign up. So in our view, the EBB's program success really depends on how well it can prevent bill shock and an abrupt end to the program. We also are concerned with how providers will move forward once the program money does end. It's our view that the providers will need to express consent from consumers to continue to provide the service without the EBB subsidy support, so they're not shocked, which again, it's all about transparency.
And I agree with these are lots of good ideas, and even some things that we didn't even consider when we were drafting our comments. I really, in particular, like the idea of the frequent communications about being transparent. What are the bill payers responsible for? What exactly are they being, what exactly are they being billed for? One of the things that was important that came up earlier is if this does apply to bundled plans. Traditionally, bundled plans don't always extract so you can see exactly what you're paying for your internet. So if providers are willing to be more transparent about that pricing, we're supportive of that. Another thing that when we're thinking about the end of that program, what is the transition plan for some of these people who are going to need support? So whether you say this is 6 weeks or 6 months, essentially some of these people, will still need to transition, whether it's Lifeline or to another program. So what are we doing to make sure that they actually know about those options and aren't necessarily being coerced into other programs that they, quite frankly, might not be able to afford? But I guess I want to bring it back to a larger existential point. When we're thinking about who's the most disconnected and who are the people that are ultimately going to rely on this program, or at least qualify for this program, the people who are most disconnected are, aside from being people of color, Black, Brown, Indigenous, people who are in remote areas, people who are disabled, seniors living on fixed income, the thing that everybody shares in common who is eligible for this program is low income. We know that. And we have not changed the fact that millions more people are now unemployed during COVID. We haven't changed the fact that our entire broadband structure is something that a lot of people simply cannot afford the price of service in their area. So we still have the existential question to answer: how do we actually get rid of needing this program? I want to get to a day where we don't need the emergency broadband program, because quite frankly, we need to start empowering communities, states, whatever it is, to be able to build solutions for themselves. So if your community wants to build a net mesh network, this community wants to use Spectrum, maybe another community, they want to build their own Wi-Fi and they want to hang out in parking lots, let them decide. But we need to find a way to eliminate barriers for people to be able to come up with their own solutions, because the current power dynamic and the current structure is not working for the people who are the most disconnected. And us putting a timeline on this program is not going to change that reality.
Thank you so much, Francella. And I'm going to pass it back on to Christian. Thank you.
Hi, Jessica. And I want to close out by giving every panelist an opportunity to actively pitch the FCC on the one sentence point you want us to take away and incorporate into the EBB. Put you all on the spot a little bit. What lesson do you think is the most important for us to learn? And I will keep you to a sentence, so make it concise. Myron, to put you on the spot first and then give you an opportunity to speak, what lesson do you think is the most important for the FCC to realize here?
A comment and then the point. I just want to thank Francella for sharing about multi-generational homes. This pandemic really, I guess, exacerbated the problems that we have with the spread of this virus. And then lastly, maybe we can partner with you all on the messaging. A lot of our people only speak Navajo, so getting another language medium out there in flyers or however in the messaging. So thank you.
Thank you, Myron. Mike, what point do you think we should take on?
I would say, focus, of course, on standing this program up as fast as possible and as quickly as possible, while also recognizing that the ultimate goal here is to make sure, as I think everybody else has noted, that customers stay connected. So also think about the long term. Think about where this program should be, what something like it needs to be in the years ahead.
Anissa, I'm going to keep just randomly going on people. So
I'm actually going to give you one sentence. Keep the rules around participation simple, administrable, and efficient.
thank you. Virginia?
I'm also going to keep it to one sentence and say, take a big tent approach to eligible consumers and eligible providers.
Thank you. Brenda?
In order to reach digital equity, we need to make sure that everyone has, number one, a device, number two, affordable broadband access, and number three, digital literacy. Thank you for having me here today representing the National Hispanic Media Coalition.
Thanks, Brenda. Steve?
I would say, be expansive, both in terms of who gets to participate as providers and who gets to participate as customers. Better to err on giving more people the chance to participate than fewer.
Thank you, Steve. And Priscilla, to round us out.
Echoing something that Virginia mentioned earlier about people that are struggling with poverty, if when the FCC is constructing its rules, looking at it through that lens, because poverty is often associated with shame, and how can we make it easy for the people who need us the most to do this without any shame?
Thank you, Priscilla. And I want to thank all of our panel participants and everyone who's participated today. From a staff perspective and from the FCC Commission perspective, it's tremendously valuable to hear your thoughts in a panel discussion like this. And I want to thank Jessica, my co-moderator, and the panelists, and I'll throw it back to Trent for any closing remarks.
Thanks so much, Christian, and thanks to all the panelists for this. If you'll indulge me just a little bit, I want to provide some concluding remarks. First of all, I'd like to thank Vice President Leiser for jumping into, we know that President Nez couldn't make it because he was caught in testifying before the Arizona Corporation Commission. And Vice President, the work of a Vice President, it seems like, is never done. So thank you for jumping in and helping us. Your views on the Navajo Nation, which I know has suffered greatly by this pandemic, were very welcome. So thank you for that. I want to talk very briefly about both of our panels because I think there was so many good ideas shared that it's worth just briefly concluding. In the first panel, it seemed like the theme was meeting people where they were, that use these trusted organizations, use lots of touch points, and that these communities that we need to reach are not monolithic, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all effort. Whether it's using religious communities or whether it's using schools or HBCUs or tribal universities or using affordable housing advocates. There are many, many people out there who are willing and ready to jump in and help get out the word about this program. We also learned that multiple languages and materials must be accessible. There is more than enough people out there that can help us with this. And so that is also going to be very important to our outreach strategy. We also learned that competition, both in the services that will be provided, but also in the outreach, can only help get out the information about this. We also learned that a single start date is very important and that having a level playing field so that you can compete for the consumers will only bring benefits to them. And we also learned from Dr. Wilson that the movie Speed is something that we should be showing to our teenagers these days so that they understand what we're talking about. I appreciate the Netflix recommendation. Our second panel, if I can channel what Steve said at the end, because he and I were thinking about this the same way, is let's think expansively. And that first comes when we're talking about helping the most vulnerable populations. Reduce eligibility barriers, reduce administrative barriers, keep it simple, use blanket eligibility, and have as many eligible households into the program as we can muster. We also had an expansive type of provider. Think about the different types of providers who are providing the service, whether it's mobile or fixed wireless. The more types of providers, the more competition, the better the services are going to be. Welcome all the providers. And that also goes to what we can do and what USAC can do, the administrator, is let's get the training out there so the providers who aren't as familiar with those systems are ready. That's going to be essential, and we know that that is starting as we speak. The other way to think about this expansively is this shouldn't just be baseline connectivity. These are generous funds that Congress has provided us, and it will result in better services for the low-income households. We also know we have some work to do. There's some distrust of government, and we're going to need to be on our game, both in outreach and also how we talk about this program, to make sure that all the eligible households understand that this is a program that can help them and that can help broadband into their lives. So in closing, I wanted to remind everybody about the brand new website that we have up at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit. I also wanted to say a couple of quick thank yous before I signed off. Thank you to Chairwoman Rosenworcel for giving us this platform and allowing us to reach this many people. I wanted to thank the commissioners, all of whom made time out of their very busy days to come on and say a few words about the importance of this program. It truly is a universal effort here at the FCC. I also want to thank the panelists. They are the ones who are out on the front lines, making sure that people know about this program, keeping us to account for this program, making sure that what we build will be good not only for the next few months, but also have the sustainability down the line. You heard that over and over again. And lastly, I want to thank the staff of the FCC. It's not easy to moderate and organize a panel, particularly when you're in the middle of writing rules and meeting with parties, and particularly when, in this case, you're given a very short deadline. So thank you for everything that you all have done. Keep up the good work. Have a great weekend. And thank you to everybody who tuned in to see this. Take care.